Let's talk about the second film. There were several points in that I found really fascinating. I mean, we can talk about Schenk at the end, but so you have the anti-abortion movement primarily in the
Yes.
out of the Christian right. They're but and so they are backing all sorts of candidates like Bush and Reagan, but in fact they're not overturning Roe v. Wade, which is their main demand. They're being played by these politicians, and so there's a kind of epiphany, and I want to talk about Leo. What's his last name?
Leonard Leo.
Yeah, Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo. Because he becomes a major focus of your film. But I had written a book on the Christian right, American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War in America, and I knew that there was Walmart money and this and that, Hobby Lobby, but I didn't understand until I watched the film that this was a completely upfront transactional relationship, a decision on the part of the Christian right to get into bed with the billionaire class, because nobody wants what the billionaires want, of course, except billionaires, but and to fund their movement. There was a very unholy alliance, and was it Leonard Leo? Was he the one whose house you showed his like big house in Maine? I mean, these people also made a killing on this stuff. But let's talk about that. I thought it was really, really interesting.
Well, it's a little complicated, but let me see if I can break it down. I mean, as you suggest, there was a deal made between the religious right, principally evangelical Christians, and big money. Big money wanted to get rid of regulations. They didn't want any regulations on things like pollution or cigarettes or voting rights, and particularly campaign finance limits. And the religious right wanted one thing in particular. They wanted to end abortion. But they needed money to do it. And indeed, the lawyer who ends up taking down Citizens United, a guy named Jim Bopp from Indiana, he started out as very much a character whose sole job was to work for the abolition of Roe v. Wade. So these groups join forces. And as Reverend Bob Schenk, who was an evangelical minister, one of these guys who used to show up in the at anti-abortion rallies with literally, aborted fetuses, hardcore guy, says at one point, sure, we can baptize the billionaires' money, and he quotes something which became the title of the film, which is, "The wealth of the wicked can be laid up for the righteous," and it testifies to a kind of religious corruption. Now, into this larger picture, enter a guy named Leonard Leo, who's not a Protestant. He's a Catholic, and a very conservative Catholic. He's a lawyer, comes out of the Federalist Society, but he shares with the evangelicals a desire or a belief that that conception begins not only that life begins not only at conception, but actually before conception, which is what Pope John Paul II said. So he's radically opposed to abortion. And his job is to use money, in many cases dark money, to fund the campaigns not of candidates for office, but of Supreme Court justices. Because what's one mechanism you could use that doesn't depend on the popular will to get your way? Well, you pack the Supreme Court. Because the Supreme Court, in a way, as Justice Scalia says in the film, is a supremely undemocratic organization. And if you can co-opt or corrupt the Supreme Court and pack it with anti-abortion zealots, then you can get what you want done. And along the way, if you, match up the justices with pals who happen to have a lot of money, over time, the Supreme Court justices also began to intuit that deregulatory agenda.
I just want to stop you, Alex, because that's a really interesting part of your film. You spend a lot of time on the Supreme Court, and you show how incestuous the relationship is, and Leonard Leo did a lot of setting up, I believe, of this kind of stuff between these incredibly wealthy donors and the justices.
That's right. What Schenck is doing from the evangelical Protestant side, Leonard Leo is doing from the Catholic side. And basically what they're doing, literally taking people and showing them the back door of the Supreme Court and ingratiating them with the Supreme Court justices so that they end up being friends with these billionaires who take them on lovely trips, fishing trips, or
well, they buy them. It wasn't Clarence Thomas driving a $200,000
RV.
RV that
Yes, it was a loan which was mysteriously forgiven.
Yeah, right, was forgiven. It's
and,
right.
and lo and behold, this person ended up having business before the Supreme Court. So, it's a transactional relationship, but also these justices, as Schenck points out, are kind of lonely, and so they called them stealth missionaries, is what Schenck called them. Very wealthy people that they would introduce to the justices, and over time they would engage in a kind of romance. It wasn't really a romance, but they would engage in these friendships that ultimately would have the effect of turning their perspectives in a very pro-corporate direction, which is evident by the decisions of the Supreme Court.
But they also control the nomination process. So, they're stacking. They've already stacked the court. And then after you talk about that, I want you to talk about Trump and what happened, with the Federalist Society and their list of candidates, and because that
becomes a key. That might be the way to get into it, because how do you stack or pack the Supreme Court? Now, obviously, we know about some of Mitch McConnell's crazy procedural inventions.
Well, this is with Merrick Garland. They just refused to hold hearings.
Yeah, that's
while
right.
Obama's in office.
Yeah, even though Obama had some months to go, and then of course they rammed through somebody else in the last month or so of Trump's term. But I think that the point here is that in order to pack the court, it turns out that you can do quite a bit to elevate the profile of people with the application of money. And in the case of Trump, who may be, unless you go back to the Gilded Age, the most transactional president of our time, he then sees this because he knows he'll have the religious right in his pocket in 2016 if he waves a list, sort of like the Joe McCarthy list, the people in the State Department. He waves a list, like I have a list of judges that from which I'm going to nominate Supreme Court justices, and they're all going to be opposed to abortion. So if you want to end Roe v. Wade, vote for me. It was that simple. And the person who put that list together for Donald Trump was Leonard Leo, who is a very intense conservative Catholic, and not surprisingly, almost all of the Supreme Court bench is comprised either of practicing conservative Catholics or people who were raised Catholics and are now high Episcopalian, which is Gorsuch.
The other thing they do is you have a clip from Anita Hill, you have the Kavanaugh hearing. They go at these both, and of course Clarence Thomas with Anita Hill, but they're accused of sexual assault, and part of this dark money goes to destroy the credibility, or attempt to destroy the credibility of the victims.
That's right, and that gets back to the kind of thing that Larry Householder was doing in Ohio. You run negative ads effectively, and the negative ads are paid for mysterious dark money forces, because that was Leonard Leo's key function for the longest time, was to raise money. That's what he was really good at. He's not.
Well, isn't there in the film where what do they give him, $1 billion, and how much is it? I mean,
well, later on he was rewarded. There's a billionaire named Barry Side who basically dropped over $1 billion into an organization run by Leonard Leo. So now Leonard Leo is a huge broker for conservative causes because he has massive amounts of money at his disposal. And that also was a kind of tax dodge because it was a way of Barry Side avoiding a tremendous amount of taxes, even as he dumped over $1 billion into the pockets of an organization run by Leonard Leo so that he could pursue the kinds of agendas that Side was interested in.